Magic, yay. So thank you, Lance, for being such an excellent platform chair. Thank you for the wonderful music. You both played beautifully, really calming atmosphere. Thank you to you all for joining us, whether here in person or online on Alta. Hello, everybody online. I want you to imagine that you are playing pool. And to make this work, I actually have to hit this clearly. There we go. Imagine that you're playing pool, and before you stretches the smooth felt table and the cue is in your hand. You've played well and made it to the final shot of the game. Sink the 8-ball and you win. Not just glory, but a fabulous prize. You can fill in whatever fabulous prize you would like to win for yourself. You bend down over the table and you consider your shot, the long cue in your hands. You line up, steady the cue, pull it back, thrust it forward, strike the cue ball, it shoots off across the table, and this month at the Ethical Society, we've been exploring one of our most important core values. I accept responsibility for my choices and actions. So it makes sense to ask whether what we think are our choices really are our choices. Or to put it another way, whether we actually have free will. This is very difficult philosophical territory philosophers have ranged over without any resolution for literal millennia. Do we control our own actions, or are we effectively automata with simply the illusion of control, or something in between perhaps? I'm sorry, we will get no resolution to those questions today. I'm very smart, but I cannot answer in about 30 minutes what the human species has failed to solve in more than 30 centuries. But I hope to map the terrain a bit for you to help you understand why this is a difficult philosophical problem and the implications that it might have. So today I'm going to present the 3 major types of response to the problem of free will, some considerations about why the question might matter, and then some of my own thoughts about why it might not, in fact, matter at all. So back to the pool table. You strike the cue ball, it shoots off across the table, and your aim is true. It impacts the 8-ball with a satisfying snap, and it rolls smoothly into the corner pocket. You have won. Congratulations. Perhaps if you're feeling very fancy that day, it looks something like this. I could totally not do that. It's very cool. So let's ask, where in this sequence of events are choices made? And in fact, I want you to raise a hand if you think at each stage a choice is being made. So raise your hand first if you think the 8-ball has a choice about whether it will go into the pocket or not. Okay, no one thinks the 8-ball has a choice, fair enough. What about the cue ball? Does it have a choice as to what to do? Okay. What about the cue then? We're just going back in the causal chain. This is clearly too easy for you. I haven't caught anyone out. Oh, great. Okay, you think the cue has a choice. We'll talk about that afterwards, I think. How about your arm? Does your arm have a choice about what to do? Okay. Well, what about your head? Right? Is your head choosing? Okay, some people think your head maybe has a choice. What if we go in, I love that, what about your brain? Is your brain making choices? Okay, more people think, but there's still some people who haven't raised their hand yet. If you haven't put your hand up yet, what do you think the answer is? What is making the choice here? What is responsible for the action occurring? What do you think? You can tell me. Training? Is training choosing? Physics is choosing? What else might be choosing? Instinct? Okay, a lot of ideas. Yourself? Okay, let's go with that one. Ourself, right? Most of us, when we're thinking about making a choice, we experience ourselves as some kind of agent, right? Which weighs up different options and makes decisions and that makes stuff happen. And that is what we often think is responsible for our choices and actions. We are. And we are not necessarily exactly the same as our brain or our head or our arm or anything like that, but we're something, and we are making choices. So when we want to make a shot in pool, we evaluate the options. Maybe we toy around a bit with different shots. Perhaps we line a few of them up to get a feel of them. When I play pool, which is not often at all, I like to get down there, really close to the table and really take my time lining up my shot to make it appear as if I have some clue as to what I am doing, which I do not. And when we do all this, we have a sense, usually, that we are responsible for what is happening. And because we feel that we make the choices, we hold ourselves responsible for the outcome. So if, like in the example I opened with, we strike the cue ball and the cue ball strikes the 8-ball and the 8-ball goes into the pocket, we get the credit. We don't say, "Oh, well done, cue ball. Good job. You won the game." We spread our arms and crow in victory because we are responsible for winning. Go us. And we get the prize as well. We don't award it to the cue or to the 8-ball itself, or even to our arm. We get the prize. So we are responsible. Our internal sense that we are making decisions, that we have freedom to choose our actions, is consistent with the first of 3 philosophical positions I'm going to talk about today. It's called libertarian free will. This is, in a manner of speaking, the common sense perspective. Libertarians, this is not political libertarianism, totally different idea, just the same word. Libertarians about free will say that we really, actually, factually have a certain degree of freedom regarding our choices. So let's go back to the pool table before you take that fateful shot. Let's rewind the world. Wasn't that cool? It took me ages to make it do that. The libertarian about free will says that you chose to take the shot the way you did, but you could have chosen otherwise. You could have angled the cue differently. You could have struck the cue ball harder or less hard. You could have just hit the ball straight at the 8-ball like a normal human being. You could have, you could have broken the cue on the floor in a fit of pique like this guy does. Whatever it is, you had a choice. And if we wound the clock back to the same point in time, you could do something differently. You could genuinely choose to do what you wanted to do. Your choices were not determined. They weren't fixed. You were free to choose. Now, probably some of you are thinking, yeah, obviously, of course, we're free to choose in that way. And this is, as I said, the common sense view. It is what it feels like inside ourselves when we make most of our decisions. We feel ourselves, at least much of the time, to have choices about how we act. We choose what to wear in the morning. We go to a restaurant and we choose what to eat from the menu. We choose how to respond to emails, how to resolve problems at our work, what gift we will buy our loved ones. We're choosing all day long. Libertarian free will, from the perspective of inside our own minds, is obviously true. The only problem is, and I'm very sorry if this disturbs you, that as far as I can tell, the consensus of scientists and philosophers who work specifically on the question of free will is that the libertarian view of free will is in fact false. We do not have the freedom we feel ourselves to have. Indeed, it's been the case for some time, at least hundreds and in fact maybe thousands of years, that philosophers in particular have been very skeptical of the idea that we have free will like that. I love this quote, for instance, from the famous creator of one of the first dictionaries of the English language, Samuel Johnson, which says, "All theory is against free will, all experience for it," which dramatizes the tension quite nicely. We feel we have free will, but when scientists and philosophers think about it, they often can't see how we possibly could. Why is this? Well, basically, because as far as our physical picture of the world is concerned, we are more like billiard balls than we think. In the modern scientific picture, human beings are basically biological machines. Extremely complex biological machines, for sure. Our brain in particular is a spectacularly complicated feat of evolutionary engineering, but we are nonetheless kind of like meat computers. Our consciousness, our experience of the world, is generated, as far as we can tell, by our brains, and our brains are a physical substance which work by shunting electrical impulses around. Our bodies create ourselves, and our bodies are part of the physical universe and obey its causal structure. Now, the ideas here very quickly become very complicated, but the basic idea is that every single piece of our bodies, from the neurons in our brain to our bones and organs, our skin and hair, is part of the universe and obeys its laws. We are not separate from the cosmos. We are part of it. And if, as science has at least historically suggested, the cosmos is fully determined, meaning that what happens at every moment in time is determined by the arrangement of things in the moment preceding it, then we are determined too. At no point do we get to step outside the cosmos and make a choice. And therefore, we have no free will, whatever we might feel about it. Now, this view is called determinism, or to be philosophically rigorous about it, it's called incompatibilist determinism, the idea that the determined nature of the universe is incompatible with the idea of free will. And it might seem at first blush a bit of a silly or weird idea. So I want to take a moment to make you feel the force of the argument. So let's go back again to that pool table. You're about to take the shot. And it feels like you are weighing up your options. But how is that happening? How are the thoughts forming in your head? Well, science says they arise from the movement of electrons around your brain. As you are thinking, neurons release neurotransmitters, which are a chemical in your brain, and those create electrical signals which activate nearby neurons, and that creates a sort of cascade of neurons which generates thoughts. The process of you thinking is a physical process, and so is the process of you acting. When you pick up the cue to go take your shot, what is happening is ultimately down to that electricity whizzing around your brain and sending signals throughout your body, telling it what to do. The problem for free will is that there's no room in this picture for anything other than the operation of standard physical forces according to set laws. The electrical signals flowing about your brain are not making choices. They are just electricity, like the electricity which turns the lights in this room on or off. And when we flick that switch, we don't think that the electricity made any choice about it. Electricity behaves according to strict physical parameters. It must do what it does. And if our thoughts and our actions in the final analysis are basically just the result of electricity navigating a very fancy container, then it's hard to see how we have free will in the sense we feel that we have it. Famous philosopher Peter van Inwagen puts it this way: if determinism is true, then our actions are the consequences of the laws of nature and events in the remote past. But it is not up to us what went on before we were born, and neither is it up to us what the laws of nature are. Therefore, the consequences of these things, including our present acts, are not up to us. We can't control all the causes that led to us doing what we do in any particular moment, and so we don't actually control what we do in that particular moment. By this reasoning, in any given situation, you do not have the ability to act otherwise. When you're considering your shot at the pool table, what is happening in your brain and body at the start of your deliberation is just the continuation of a physical process which began before that, the unfolding of a previous state of the universe. And the same is true of the moment before that one, and the moment before that, all the way back to the beginning of time. In this sense, our choices are entirely determined by things we had no control over, like dominoes falling due to the action of a previous domino in the chain. No domino makes a choice to fall, whatever it might feel about it. They just all fall according to the laws of physics. And in case that scientific argument doesn't do anything for you, then there are philosophical arguments for determinism too. So let's go back again to that pool table, which is by now wearing some of the felt off from you leaning against it, preparing for this epic shot, and think about how you came to the decision to take the shot in the precise way you did. How did you choose? Presumably, in your mind, you had a set of options, and you weighed up the options and chose the one you wanted to perform for whatever reason that was most salient to you. So let's say you had two main choices. And note that this is a philosophical argument. It's got nothing to do with physics at all. Your main choices were to make the shot directly or to make that trick shot that we all watched the video of. Now, for whatever set of reasons, you, the first time you took this shot, landed on the trick shot. That was what you decided. But now we've wound the world back, and you're weighing up your options again. Now, in order to have libertarian free will, you need to be in exactly the same situation, but make a different choice. That is what the libertarian free will supporter says that we can do. Same situation, different choice. But if you're in exactly the same situation when you're about to take the shot, then your reasoning process will also have been the same. So you will have weighed up the same options. You will have the same desires, the same wants, the same skill level, the same training. Every feature which leads up to the decision will be the same. So surely you must make the same decision. Those reasons that led you to take that shot in the way you did in the first place still persist. And those reasons were why we took the shot the way we took it in the first place. So if we set up the reasoning again in exactly the same way, we'll come to the same outcome. So we haven't actually escaped determinism. Okay, you might think, well, let's just wind the universe back a little bit further, and we can have a different reasoning process, and that might lead to a different decision. Sure. But there are two problems with this for those who don't want to accept determinism. First, what would make your reasoning process different? Presumably, in order for your reasoning process to be different, something further in the past would itself have to have changed, and that means you're not comparing two exactly the same situations in which you're making a different decision, but two different situations. And that leads to the second problem, which is that if we say our process of reasoning must be different in order for us to take a different action, that's not saying that in the same situation you could make a different choice. That's saying that in a different situation, you would make a different choice. And that's just determinism. The situation determines our choice. So determinism actually turns out to be very difficult to avoid, which is why many eminent thinkers believe that our sense that we have choices over our actions is an illusion. And if determinism is true, at least some people believe, it could be very detrimental to our idea of ourselves. We feel ourselves to have real choices, and many of our most cherished beliefs about human beings and our conduct seem to depend upon the idea that we do indeed have free will. How can we understand rationality and moral responsibility, for instance, if we are never making free choices? If a murderer is just doing what they must do based on the unfolding of the physics of the universe, then how can they be morally responsible for what they have done? Surely the idea of moral responsibility depends on our freely choosing one action over another. If, when we're considering a difficult intellectual problem, we're simply obeying the laws of physics and could never come to a different conclusion, in what sense are we rational? And since rationality and morality are considered by many to be really important parts of being human, constitutive parts of our identity as human beings, determinism seems to undermine our humanity entirely. Luckily, perhaps, there is a third group of thinkers who promise to get us out of the shackles of determinism, the compatibilists. Now, compatibilists, broadly speaking, argue that although physical determinism, well, it gets very complicated. The language is not going to satisfy any philosophers in the audience, I apologize. But basically, they argue that although determinism may be true, that doesn't matter because we can still have meaningful freedom of will nonetheless. And there are about 1 billion different flavors of compatibilism, each with their own version of the argument, but the basic idea is that even if it is the case that were we to wind the world backward before we make a particular choice, you could not actually choose to do anything different, even if that's true, that doesn't mean that notions like freedom, rationality, and morality are meaningless. We just, they suggest, have to get better at understanding what those terms should mean. And once we analyze what we really mean by terms like freedom and moral responsibility, we will discover that we can have the important parts of those concepts even if we live in a deterministic universe. I know that that is a very unsatisfactory explanation, but that's basically what compatibilists say. We can sort of have our cake and eat it too. One of the most significant contemporary compatibilists is famous atheist philosopher and Father Christmas impersonator Daniel Dennett. So those are the big three positions. And as this 2020 survey of professional philosophers demonstrates, the battlefield is currently essentially a fight between flavors of compatibilism and flavors of libertarianism, though the defense of libertarian free will, that type that most of us think and feel and believe we have, seems to be mainly left to religious philosophers who argue essentially that because science seems so detrimental to libertarianism, we must add something magical to the picture like God or souls or something like that in order to preserve our free will. And that's why you might be able to see on the slide that there is a strong correlation between those who think that the fine-tuning argument or the idea that the whole universe was created by an intelligence is correct, and the idea that libertarian free will is correct, because those ideas go together. So right now, compatibilism is winning. I don't hear any cheers for this idea. Well, yay! Okay, you're happy about it. That's good. So how happy you should feel about how compatibilism is doing in the philosophical marketplace right now will depend upon how you feel about the quality of compatibilist arguments. And especially, it will depend on if you feel it is important to your sense of self or your sense of people's rationality and moral responsibility that were we to wind back the clock of the universe and go back to a moment in time before a specific choice, that you should be able to make a different choice than the one you did before. Do you think that that sense of free will is important, that you could actually have done otherwise? Or are you okay believing that everything you have done was something you had to have done given the unfolding physical laws of the universe, and everything you will ever do in your life will only be able to turn out one way based on the continuing unfolding of the physical laws of the universe? If you think that's an important component of your freedom, I'm sorry to tell you that the vast majority of philosophers think you don't have it. The decisions you make will be the decisions you make, and they cannot be otherwise. How free does that make you feel? But before you despair, here is what I think about the free will debate. I'd be interested to hear what you think about it afterwards. I don't think it matters at all. I've thought about these questions for many years since I became interested in philosophy. I cannot think of any single scenario in which it really matters whether we have free will or not. Let's just go through the three options I've outlined again. Libertarian free will. Okay, if this is true, we have free will, at least up to a point. We can have moral responsibility and rationality and all those philosophical goodies we want out of free will. So no worries, the world is really as we experience it. We have real choices, so we're fine, right? 1 out of the 3 down, we don't have to worry about that. What about compatibilism? Well, compatibilists say that determinism is true, but that does not do away with meaningful accounts of moral responsibility, rationality, etc. Yes, at the deepest level, our choices may be determined, but nonetheless, we're still able to meaningfully say of human beings that we deliberate, that we think about our decisions. Our decisions can reflect our character, morality is intact. Okay, well, if that's true, that's fine, right? What we want out of free will, we can have. We want to be morally responsible agents. We want to be rational agents. We can have it. The truth of the world might not be exactly like we experience it, but pragmatically, in our everyday lives, it doesn't matter. So, hooray. Okay, good. If compatibilists are right, I think we're okay. So finally, the big boogeyman, the scary one, determinism, or incompatibilist determinism. We don't have free will. We're basically exactly like a billiard ball. Everything we do is determined by prior events. If you reround the world back to before you took that fateful shot, you couldn't do anything different. The same thing will happen every single time. The impression that we ever had a choice is an illusion. Moral responsibility and intellectual agency do not exist. We are no more responsible for winning the game of pool than the cue ball was responsible for winning the game of pool. It's just physical matter moving around, obeying fixed laws. We are cogs in a machine, cogs moved by other cogs. Okay, what then? Well, in that circumstance, and this, I promise you this is not, I'm not meaning to be trite. In that circumstance, we don't get to choose how we react to that information. Whether we are convinced of the truth of determinism or not is itself determined. So whether you leave here today believing we have free will or not, those thoughts were just the result of some prior physical conditions, and there's no meaningful sense in which you could have had any say over them, and it doesn't make any sense at all to say something like, well, now I know that I have no free will. I'm going to choose to think a certain way about life. Because you don't have that choice. That's the whole point of this flavor of determinism. We don't get to make those sorts of decisions. So how could it possibly matter? The world is going to be what it's going to be. It doesn't matter. So those are the three basic options, and in none of the cases does it ever make sense to worry about whether you have free will or not. Because in the first two options you do, so nothing to worry about. And in the third option you don't, so you have no control over whether you worry. It is, from a pragmatic perspective, an entirely pointless discussion. But I'm sorry, I wasted your whole time. But I think we can say one more potentially interesting thing. Because if it is true that the situation is as I've described, then we can draw a further inference. The only danger in this discussion of free will, I think, would be to convince people that they don't have it when they actually do. We've already figured out that under a deterministic worldview, what we do is what we will do, and there's no changing it. So put that aside. But under the compatibilist and libertarian perspectives, we could potentially do real harm by convincing people they do not have free will, when in fact they do, at least to the extent that they need to be morally responsible intellectual agents. Because then we might actually undermine their sense of intellectual agency and moral responsibility, because we would be telling people that they don't have free will and are not responsible for their actions, which might lead them to act in ways that they otherwise would not. And indeed, there is some experimental support for that worry. Some psychologists, such as Kathleen Voss and Jonathan Schuller, have studied what happens when you try to convince people that free will is an illusion. And they have found some evidence to suggest that people, quite predictably, act worse. A passage from an article in The Atlantic by Stephen Cave describes these experiments and what they found. The researchers asked one group of participants to read a passage arguing that free will was an illusion, and another group to read a passage that was neutral on the topic. And then they subjected the members of each group to a variety of temptations and observed their behavior, sort of like Satan and Christ, but in a laboratory. Would differences in abstract philosophical beliefs influence people's decisions? Yes, indeed. When asked to take a math test with cheating made easy, the group primed to see free will as illusory proved more likely to take an illicit peek at the answers. And when given an opportunity to steal, to take more money than they were due from an envelope of $1 coins, $1 coins, those whose belief in free will had been undermined took more. On a range of measures, the researchers found that people who are induced to believe less in free will are more likely to behave immorally. It seems that when people stop believing they are free agents, they stop seeing themselves as blameworthy for their actions. And consequently, they act less responsibly and give in to their baser instincts. So perhaps, and this is me speaking now, perhaps the controversy over free will need not be settled by experiment or by philosophy in order for us to know the right way forward. Perhaps the responsible thing is to act as if we had free will and teach others that we do indeed have it, whether the evidence that we have it is solid or not. After all, if we don't have free will, well, we don't have a choice anyway. That's the end of my platform. But it is not the end of what I need to speak to you about today, because I've stayed at the podium because I need to tell you about a choice that I have recently made. When I was asked to succeed Kate Lovelady as leader of this ethical society, nobody could possibly have known what would happen in the months following. No one at that time knew that COVID was on the horizon. And when COVID hit and we were forced to close, just a couple of months before I was due to take over from Kate, I knew that my time with you would be very different from how I had imagined it. Leading the society through the pandemic required me to develop a whole new set of skills and make countless extremely difficult decisions. I did not train, regardless of appearances, as an online content producer or as an epidemiologist, but since March of 2020, I've had to act a little bit like both. I was required to make decisions, potentially, literally life and death decisions, about when to open and close our building, how to maintain social distancing, which programs to reintroduce and when, which I was never prepared for and I never imagined. So when the pandemic hit, I made a commitment to myself. I would work incredibly hard to keep this community together while this building was closed, and I would always stick to our values, trying to make decisions in line with our highest principles as ethical humanists as we navigated the uncertainty of the pandemic. And I'm proud of what we achieved together. I'm genuinely amazed at the resilience and optimism of this community. But the work that I was required to do during the pandemic was very difficult and draining, a situation that was exacerbated by our decision to go from 2 full-time leaders to 1, which is a decision I entirely supported, and I think it was the correct decision for the financial health of the society, but it placed a burden on me which was very difficult to carry. And so, with great regret, and in consultation with my husband Colton, I've decided that when my current contract expires at the end of May 2023, I will be leaving the Ethical Society of St. Louis. I want to say it has been an absolute privilege to serve this community for the past 8 years. I have learned a huge amount from you, and I hope you have learned something from me as well. This is a strong and healthy community with a lot to offer any potential leader, and I am certain you will find someone fantastic to help you regroup and rebuild after COVID, but that person will not be me. I've always viewed this community as a beacon, as a great light shining out humanist values into a city, a state, a country, and a world which desperately needs them. But beacons require fuel, and I fear that in the past 2 years especially, I placed myself upon this beacon, and I am all burned up. I will not be vanishing immediately, of course. My sabbatical begins December 1st, and until then, there are lots of things that I intend to do. First, we are in the process of hiring both a new Sikh director and, sadly, a new music director, and I will ensure that both those positions are filled and well ensconced before a new leader begins their work. Second, I am working to improve our internal documentation and processes so that we have much clearer expectations for key volunteer positions, a clearer pipeline to membership, etc. And third, I want to run an actual marketing campaign at least once while I'm the leader, so look out for that in the next couple of months as we prepare for the beginning of next year's programs. Also, I know that a lot of you are excited to make a decision about how our platform time change experiment went. So please look in this week's email blast or on Facebook for the survey that we sent out asking you for your views on the platform time and actually respond to it. It would be nice to get a large response so we can be informed about what our members think. I know that some of you will feel badly about this decision I've made. Some of you may be delighted, and that's fine too. But many probably feel that this has been a time of great disruption and uncertainty for this community. The pandemic is still with us. We look around and we don't see all the friends here that we used to see. There are so few children on Sundays. Whatever happened to Forum? Everyone's always asking me. There are lots of question marks still about what the future for this community holds. And honestly, that's true for every single community like this. We are living in a new world, and no one knows exactly how to navigate it. But one thing I know is that communities like this one are more essential now than they have ever been. At a time when we've been ripped apart physically by a virus and psychologically by the many incredible challenges that human beings face, people desperately need places of connection, growth, encouragement, and hope. And while people need communities like this one, the Ethical Society of St. Louis will continue to thrive. I am already working closely with the search team who will be looking for my replacement to ensure that you have your pick of the best possible candidates to replace me. The chairs of that team have already been selected and have begun the very initial considerations related to their work. One reason I wanted to tell you this news a whole year in advance was so you have the most time possible to determine what you want from a leader and ample opportunity to scour the globe in search of one. And I know you will find someone fantastic. As for me, I do not know what is next. Don't ask me because I do not know. All I know is that I am hugely grateful for the welcome you've always offered me and the trust you placed in me, and I hope that I adequately repaid it. I'm happy to answer questions about this after the platform Q&A, but I'd like to reserve the Q&A itself for questions about free will. I'm sure you have tons of those. I will hang around after that to speak about the other thing, so you can ask me questions about that then. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. Yeah. I've known James since he first came here. I think we met at a bar when he was visiting the very first time, just